Assalamu alaikum. Today on Noran Academy, we discuss the shipbuilder's amanah. If you benefit, please support by subscribing and sharing as a sadaqah.
So let's dive into this incredible lesson on sacred trust, something that comes to us from the really rich heritage of Islamic craftsmanship. I want you to just imagine for a moment a time when the world was crisscrossed by vast oceans and these incredible trade routes. Back then, a successful voyage, and honestly, the very survival of the crew, it wasn't just left up to chance. It was actually sealed in the wood and the iron of the ships themselves, resting on choices made by craftsmen months or even years before a single sail was raised.
Now, this massive network of global trade, it was really built on something much deeper than just spices and silks. You see, it was founded on a kind of trust that stretched across entire oceans, a deeply spiritual principle, a sense of accountability that touched every single thing that people made.
And the word for this, the core concept, is amanah. We often translate it as trust, but it's so much more than that. It's a sacred responsibility, something entrusted to you that you are directly answerable for before Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. It's about having integrity when nobody is looking. It's about reliability being your default setting. And it's about doing your job not just to a human standard, but to a divine one.
So, to really see this principle in action, we're going to turn to the story of a man named Harun. He was a shipbuilder, but for him, his work was way more than just a job. It was his calling, and it was guided by this incredible belief that keeping people safe, well, that was an act of worship in itself.
But how did Harun even develop a belief like that? Well, his journey didn't just start with learning how to build ships. It started with building his character. He began an apprenticeship where the whole foundation of the craft was built from two things that you just could not separate: skill and conscience.
As a young apprentice, Harun's mentor taught him one single, simple, but incredibly powerful rule. He said, if it floats, it carries trust. And that meant that every ship, every single vessel, was so much more than wood and nails. It was a carrier of lives, of livelihoods, and of the builder's own honor.
And this just perfectly illustrates a wider principle. You see, technical skill was only half the story. Without a moral conscience to guide it, without that sense of amanah, the craft itself was seen as just incomplete. True excellence, or what we call ihsan, demanded both.
Now, it's pretty easy to hold on to your principles when the seas are calm, right? The real test, that comes when the tides of the market start to get choppy. And Harun, well, he soon faced a major conflict between the pressures of business and the principles he was taught to live by.
As trade started booming, merchants began coming to him with new demands. They wanted ships built way faster. They wanted him to use cheaper, less reliable timber. They even pushed for thinner hulls to cut down on weight and get more speed. And their justification? It was all business. Storms are rare, they'd say, basically gambling with sailors' lives just to make a bit more profit.
So you can see this stark contrast in how they thought. On one side, you have the merchant's way, faster, cheaper, and based on taking risks for money. But on the other side, you have Harun's way, a slower, more deliberate pace using only strong, inspected wood, because for him, safety wasn't just a feature, it was a sacred duty.
So what did Harun do? He refused. Point blank. He would not compromise on the quality of his materials or the integrity of his work. He turned away the weak wood and just kept on with his meticulous process, even though it meant slowing down production. And yeah, this decision had a cost. Some of his clients actually left.
Sticking to your principles can sometimes feel like a pretty lonely path, I know. But integrity, it isn't proven by what you say or by your marketing. It's proven by results. And Harun's commitment? Well, it was about to face the ultimate test.
One season, that confident claim from the merchants that storms are rare, it was proven terribly, terribly wrong. A series of violent storms just battered the coast. Ships that had been built quickly and cheaply, they were heavily damaged. And tragically, one of them sank. But every single one of Harun's ships, built with patience and with principle, returned to port completely safe.
In the aftermath of that storm, a new phrase started going around among the sailors in the port. It wasn't some marketing slogan. It was a statement of fact, born from hard experience. They would say, if he built it, we trust it. Harun's name had become his guarantee. His amanah had been proven right there, in the middle of the storm.
This moment became the foundation of his entire leadership and his legacy. As you can imagine, demand for Harun's ships just soared.
Now, he could have expanded super fast, just chasing the money. But his approach to growth was different. He focused on scaling his accountability before he ever scaled his revenue.
You see, his principles weren't just ideas, they were practical. He didn't just talk about integrity, he actually built systems to enforce it. He had load limits engraved right onto the hulls of the ships. He started mandatory inspections. He made sure his workers were paid fairly because he recognized their amanah too. And maybe the most important thing he did? He trained his own apprentices to always question shortcuts, even if he was the one suggesting them. The real moral climax of his story, though, came when a really powerful merchant offered him this huge, exclusive contract. It was incredibly lucrative, but there was one catch. He had to build lighter, riskier ships to carry more cargo. Harun refused. And that night, he wrote this powerful line, "If my prophet sinks a family, it will sink me before Allah."
And Harun's decision right there, it illustrates a core Islamic principle that is so relevant for us today. We live in a world that is obsessed with optimization, with efficiency, with finding the next shortcut. But this is a reminder that not every efficiency is actually ethical.
So let's bring this timeless lesson from the story of a shipbuilder into our own lives. What does amanah actually look like for us, right here, right now?
For years and years after Harun passed away, his legacy lived on. His name meant safety. It meant trust. When sailors would arrive at a port and get assigned a ship, they wouldn't ask how fast it was or how much it could carry. They would ask one simple question: who built it? His integrity had become the ultimate measure of quality. And this brings the question right to our own doorstep. In our work, in our studies, in all of our responsibilities. When we're faced with that choice, when cutting a corner just seems so tempting, when it might lead to more profit or an easier path, what are we going to choose? Will we accept the risk, or will we carry the amanah?
Presented and created by Norin Studio.